So we are back. Wild couple of weeks. We were. Let's actually think of these one. That one. Better. Yeah, whatever. So this is the first week of Lent. We would have done Transfiguration Sunday last Sunday, and Ash Wednesday. Yeah, obviously didn't really work out.
If that's not right about it.
So just kind of quick reminders on Lent. Not all of us grew up in churches that did Lent or kind of did this long preparation. It is a symbol. It starts 40 days before Easter, and the imagery is that of kind of pilgrimage, of journey, of joining Jesus in the wilderness. And so people traditionally will either do fasts or abstinences with kind of those celebratory pauses on Sundays. The idea of recognizing kind of our own simplicity and need, whether that's the fact we're going to die someday on Ash Wednesday, or just intentionally doing less of things that we know maybe have a little more hold on our life than we like to admit to ourselves, things that we maybe overvalue. That we don't ultimately need, for the sake of receiving those things back as gifts, for the sake of recognizing that they are gifts from God. But they are ultimately not Him. They are, as Jesus says in the first of the temptations, it's not bread that ultimately feeds us, but God. So I think this is kind of an intentional time. I think there's been a lot of kind of forced reflection for many people during COVID when society has taken a lot of things away. But I think Lent is another opportunity to say, okay, we're not doing this to make ourselves feel guilty. We're not doing this to ourselves to suffer for some other reason. It's an opportunity to again say, okay, what is important? Will I join Jesus in the wilderness? Will I join Jesus heading toward that cross? Because that's actually the path to life and resurrection. So as always, I think the reflective nature and the intentional nature are very valuable. As always, if you guys want any help with it, I am available for whatever you want to call it, spiritual direction or coaching. People don't really take me up on that, but if you are interested in this year and kind of doing time of reflection, that's why you pay me. I'm here to coach, to nurture your guys' spiritual lives, and so I am available to help you think through these things if you want to approach Lent in a little different way this year. Just out of curiosity, is anyone fasting or abstaining or adding any special celebrations? I think we usually should do both, do some things we cut back from for a little while, as well as do some kind of different routines. Just for an example, I know I usually just stop buying like fun things for myself. Like I don't buy myself any new music because I love finding new music. I love looking for it. Don't buy myself anything board game related or whatever. For a few months, I can say, yeah, I've got plenty. And then my addition this year is going into it, bought a little poetry book where a guy does a different poem he's selected for Lent and kind of walks us through that. So it's not usually how I kind of do my devotions, but it's just a little thing that mixes it up so things don't become routine. Anyone else thought at all about any fasts, abstinences, or kind of additions, mixes up you're thinking about doing for Lent this year? I know it kind of snuck up on me. I was a little distracted last year or last week.
Last weekend.
Last weekend.
Lent?
Yes.
So,
I'm doing a devotional for Lent, but also I'm working procrastination. This is my word. So I'm working on procrastination and using this Lent as an opportunity to be more intentional about not procrastinating. And so that with the things around the house, but as well as my quiet time. I have a tendency to put it off like towards the end of the day, and then I end up kind of falling asleep on what I'm doing. So trying to make that the first thing, that I do, not as opposed to when I get to it. So procrastination, that's my word. So
I was really hoping you were saying, I've just decided I'm going to start procrastinating more. I'm going to stop fighting it, and we're doing this thing. for Lent. Anyone else have anything they want to just kind of throw out there that we can, again, be praying for you or supporting you in, is looking at Lent this year?
I'm not drinking during the week. I feel like that became a habit due to the pandemic of like kids are in bed and, not excessively, but have a drink. And so, yeah, just kind of giving that up.
Perfect.
And here, I thought you were kidding. I thought you were
I
kidding.
got 4 kids. She's not kidding. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you're not alone.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. Did you join her in that one, Mike? I hate it when you give up drinking for Lent. You start winning every board game we play. All of a sudden.
No, not specifically in that. I kind of was in a similar boat to you guys. We had a pipe burst at works this last week, so that's kind of consumed most of my week, and there really
Yeah.
hasn't been much time for reflection or anything else.
Yeah. Well, and I think I also want to point out, a lot of the time people are like, oh, I missed it. I can't do anything. Like, it's not too late. And the other one is people are like, oh yeah, I was supposed to be doing this and I like messed up. Like I forgot I'm not eating sweets and I had a chocolate bar. And like, it's like, okay, just get back on the horse. Yeah. You're human. Who cares? You're in the midst of stuff. And I don't know, like people get so uptight about it. And that is not remotely the point. It is supposed to be, I think it's supposed to be very freeing because we give up things that we recognize these are generally good things that we maybe have been overleaning on or overvaluing, again, with the hope of receiving them back from God in their kind of proper perspective at the end of Lent. So I don't have much use for this driving guilt-based religion, if you hadn't noticed by now. It does not draw people closer to God, in my opinion. Most of the time it teaches them to be fearful or things that are other than kind of God's deep love for them. So we always give things up to be free. Any last thoughts on kind of Lent or that rhythm? Keep thinking about it. Keep looking again. If there's, as always, if there is a specific devotional or if you want suggestions that interest you, I'm more than happy to put Wayfarer's funds at your disposal. So we will be happy to get that for you if something catches your eye now or later in Lent. If you want a book to read or a devotional or anything, that's available as well. So what I thought we would do this year with Lent is, there's kind of a set of traditional readings that kind of go through that last piece of the gospel story. They always start with kind of the temptation and things, but for some reason this year, I really got just kind of stuck thinking about just kind of who we are as people. This like long Lenten season we've been stuck in with COVID. And so this year, I think I'm going to look at Jesus' parables. I think Jesus teaches in parables because he doesn't want this to be some heady, abstract, intellectual thing. He wants everyday kind of earthy stories that, people who largely couldn't read could connect. Well, the kingdom of God is kind of like this. And they would go, oh yeah, I know what that is. And he would make these connections between kind of the everyday and God. And so we're going to look at parables with the goal of saying, okay, what is the kingdom actually like? What is God inviting us to live into? So again, we will start that next week. Start looking at the parables. This week, I'm going to do what I had for us for Transfiguration Sunday, because that's always the very last Sunday before Lent starts. I think it's a neat image of showing Christ in all his glory as he's shining up on the top of that mountain before you kind of plunge back down into the last week of Jesus' life. And I think the Gospel of Mark is specifically designed that way. Jesus first announces, the crucifixion is coming after Peter says, this is who you are. You're the Christ. And Jesus says, yes, I am. But let me teach you what the Christ is actually all about. First mentions his suffering, his resurrection. And then we get this story, the Transfiguration, and then we kind of dive back in. And so I think that was a very intentional choice to make sure we see Christ in his glorification before we do dive into the more somber season of Lent. So I'm going to read from Mark chapter 9. 6 days later, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and brought them to the top of a very high mountain where they were alone. and he was transformed in front of them. His clothes were amazingly bright, brighter than if they had been bleached white. Elijah and Moses appeared and were talking with Jesus. Peter reacted to all this by saying to Jesus, "Rabbi, it's good that we're here. Let's make 3 shrines, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." He said this because he didn't know how to respond, for the 3 of them were terrified. And then a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice spoke from the cloud, "This is my son, whom I dearly love. Listen to him." Suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. And as they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them not to tell anyone what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept it to themselves, wondering, "What's this rising from the dead?" So just a couple of things I wanted to point out about this story. You've probably heard a lot of it. The way that Mark tells this story is he's drawing on some specific images that I think were very popular in Jesus' time. One image for God's presence and God's glory that was very popular in Jesus' time was this idea of the Shekinah. Have you guys heard this phrase? It's a Jewish word for kind of God's shininess and glory. It's one of the translations. There's this really fascinating scene in the book of Ezekiel where he's watching and he sees God's presence as this kind of glowing, fiery mist rise up off the temple and leave, saying God is not in this place anymore. Something really bad can happen. And his kind of dream at the end of the book is he sees God's presence come back down on the temple. God is here, God is with us, God is among us. It's an image very similar to what we see in Revelation a lot of the time. And in Jesus' day, that was one of the most popular images of God's presence and that God was here. And the kind of popular story was when the Messiah shows up, when the Messiah's kind of kingdom is established again, when we've kicked enough Roman butt, then everybody is going to see the glory of God, the Shekinah, the shininess come down on the temple, and no one in the world will be able to miss the fact that we're a big deal, right? That we are God's chosen people. No one will miss it anymore. That was kind of the just popular image, the popular dream. And so I think the way Mark tells the story is he's playing on this. The first thing is Peter says, "You're the Messiah. We know who you are." And Jesus, the first thing he does is say, "No, you're thinking about this wrong." And then right after that, we get this image that says, yes, he is the Messiah. And now here's this like shiny, glorified, special version of God that they're expecting, but the message is a little bit different. And so I actually think that's a little bit of Peter's kind of goofy, like it says he just doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know what he's talking about there. But a lot of people think that why he saw this is he actually recognizes something that's true. In some ways, we are seeing Jesus as he's going to be at the end of the world, right? We see him in all his glory and all his fullness here. And the Feast of Booths was one of the typical Jewish festivals, and a lot of people associated that, especially at this time, with the end times. And so I think Peter's instinct was right in saying, yes, this is a hint of what's coming, like of the establishment of everything, when everything's going to be made okay, this day we've been waiting for with God's presence. And so he's like, oh, yeah, okay, what do we know? What do we do? Oh, yeah, that's the booths. We got to set up the booths. So let's make some booths for the 3 of them. And so good old Peter, I think his instincts are right, but as usual, he's just doing something that's a bit foolish. He doesn't know, he's trying to do something. He wants to be involved. He wants to get his hands dirty. He wants to be helpful, right? But I think in a moment like this, you probably should just shut up and soak it in, right? And I think in some ways that is what God is saying to them as well. We see Moses, we see Elijah, obviously connecting Jesus with the law, the prophets, everything that's come before. He's the culmination. And yet what God says here is so important. He says, look, this is my beloved son. This is someone who's so important to me. That's really important going into the rest of Mark, going into either Lent or the Passion, because it's pretty easy to interpret what Jesus is about to go through as a failure to have God's trust, right? that's what they throw in his face. Oh yeah, if you're the Messiah, if you're God's beloved son, come off the cross, we'll believe you. The Messiah isn't supposed to be the biggest loser. The Romans aren't supposed to be able to kill him. The religious leaders aren't supposed to reject him. The fact that all these things happen, it's just proof that you're not who you thought you were, right? And yet before all that mess, before all that darkness, we have a full affirmation that I think is for Jesus as well. He hears this voice, this is my beloved son. No matter what is about to happen, do not mistake him for anyone else. And I think he says to the disciples as well, like, listen to him. He's going to tell you things you're not going to understand, the things you don't want to hear. Listen to him, obey him, learn from him. You've got him present. You've got something really special. And so I think one of the important things about this story, whether we're diving into Lent, whether we're frustrated with COVID stuff, or just the way the world is right now, is yes, there is a foretaste. Things are going to be made better. That's what we are promised. We are promised there will be a time when God's presence is super obvious to everyone. And a little bit like, I think, kind of the popular notion in Jesus' day, a little bit like what Peter's going after here, we kind of want to camp out, we kind of want to acknowledge and jump to the happy ending, right? We need that hint, but the glorification, the fullness comes after the cross. It comes after the darkness. It comes after a often long and difficult sojourn in this world, because that is what it is to love the human race. That is what it is to love humanity and to live here, to really live here, not just to be killing time, hoping we get to die and go to heaven soon. It's not what Jesus did. He knew what was at the end. He knew he was the beloved son. We know we are the beloved children of God. We know what is at the end of this story. There is resurrection. Jesus absolutely beating death. But we don't get to just jump to that. Not because, God doesn't love us and doesn't want what's best for us, because that is the path to, I think, true happiness, to true fullness, to God's presence. We join him in death, that we may join him in resurrection. So again, reminder that the glorification follows the cross. I think it's important in Lent. I think it's important just in discipleship in general, right? Take up your cross and follow me. It's important in what the disciples are going to be seeing and witnessing and experiencing. Come and follow me. You know who I actually am. You've seen me. You don't have the capacity to understand it yet. But I am the glorified God. I am the God who will be on the other side of the cross. So now let's dig in and follow. Any thoughts on this passage? Any other things bouncing around your guys' head right now?
Now this figure of a person that glows so brightly that you can't look at him occurs several times in the Old Testament, right? Mm-hmm. In Ezekiel and Daniel, this figure appears, this man that is wearing white robes that glow. And so don't you think that anybody reading this account would have associated with that as well?
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of those in this. I mean, another one is mountaintops. Both Moses and Elijah went up onto a mountaintop to meet with God, and then he's playing on that. They were up on a mountaintop, but this time God is coming to them from below. Yeah, the glow of it representing God's presence is there. Yeah, it's a very loaded passage, and you can really dig into those imagery, but it's kind of a gathering, a culmination of so much in the Old Testament and the intertestamental period and Jesus' day. It's a really important moment, especially in Mark. I didn't get into it a lot, but you can spend a lot of time looking at. There are 3 times in the book of Mark we're told that basically heaven is torn open and God comes down. And we're told that at Jesus' baptism, we're told it here, and we're told it at the cross. So yeah, there are three really important moments where God is loud and present, and a lot of people think that, you know, one of the reasons that Mark doesn't have a real ending, it leaves with everyone kind of bewildered, is because right here we have a hint that Jesus is God. And so after the transfiguration, you don't need to run into the risen Lord, because you know where the story's going. One of the takes on it. Anyone else? Thoughts or?
But you know what, the part that he says, where he says, you know, I don't want you to don't tell anybody what you've seen until afterwards. Is there an instance where this story is related further in the Gospels? I mean, do we hear, any of the writers refer back to this instance?
Well, I mean, it shows up in each of the Gospels. Is that what you're asking? But
Right.
in fact, they're like looking back and saying, "Oh, well, that was the significance of this."
Right. So yeah.
Well, there's both John and Peter in some of their letters make references to, we've seen him. We've seen him in his glory. We've seen the fullness of God in his presence. I think, John was there, and I think the Gospel of John and the way he presents it was dramatically affected by this. In the beginning was the Word was God, and the Word was with God. Like, I think this was the germ of that in a lot of ways, that way of thinking about who Jesus was and the rest of his ministry. We don't have a lot of comments that directly go back to it, but I think, again, you remember Mark is building the gospel out of Peter's reminiscences, and each of the gospels is putting together the pieces, because these guys at the time just didn't have a clue. They pieced together all these experiences they had. They pulled out the ones that were most significant. So yeah, I think the fact they highlighted this story says they realized after the fact how incredibly important this experience was. They didn't have the Holy Spirit yet. They didn't have the capacity to understand what God was actually up to, as we often don't when we run into God, right?
Well, no, you're right. I don't know why it just sort of dawned on me the way that you said it, is that they're not writing this as they go along. They're writing it as after the fact. I don't know what I was thinking.
Mhm.
Yeah. So this is not like, like how we're always journaling, right? This is not them going home and journaling what happened today. So, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's just much more like, you may have journaled about some significant thing that happened to you, when you're 20, but when you're 40 or 60, you look at it, you're like, that was such a key moment. I didn't realize it at the time. At the end of the day, you're not really probably that interested in your 20-year-old self's version of it, right? I mean, 60 and older, you actually get how important that moment was and where it, how the pieces fit together. And I think that's the Gospels with Jesus' life. Yeah, at the time, they had no clue how important this was. I mean, I think Peter's even got some self-depreciating humor in there, telling the stories the way he does, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Colin, why Moses and Elijah? Were they the prime examples of the law and the prophets? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, Moses and the law is obvious, since he, dictated, brought a lot of it down. Elijah representing the prophets, probably because he's one of the first ones before they started writing it. But it also probably has to do with the fact they both met God face to face on mountains at one point. So there's kind of a lot packed into those symbols of mountain, then meeting God, that representing the law and the prophets, them having special relationships with God. So there's, like I said, a lot packed in there.
I was thinking about how you said they wanted a little taste of the future to come. Peter wanted to set up the tents. I just feel like that applies so much to how we have to wait on so many things all the time. Like at lunch, we were talking about how, COVID may be many more years to come, but we want to know how it will all turn out. And yet we're all going to be changed by it. I'm thinking about our kids and how are they going to turn out, and we just want to know so much right now and want to have this presence of God in everything. But there's this waiting and little revealing as we go along. Is that right?